I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now, and we're back from the big long weekend, the big Family Day weekend. On the phone with me, Ian Burns, our managing editor out in Ottawa. There, how was Family Day for you?
Not so great. It was a lot of shoveling. There's been God knows how much snow, but the whole of this part of Ontario has just been buried under snow, and that's kind of the context in which that plane crashed as well. Very snowy down there in Toronto as well.
Yeah, we're gonna have a little. We'll have a video of that crash in a bit here as well. Um, Terrible. Um, but looking at BC, because our legislature is actually going to sit today, the first time since the election in October, with a throne speech that kicks off our session of extraordinary change, according to what they're saying. Any expectations, Mr. Burns?
I would say, being slightly cynical as I am, that I expect Mr. Trump to be a gigantic shadow over the speech today and to be blamed for all bad things in British Columbia.
Including the promised $1,000 that's been clawed back there, not clawed back, but I guess no longer being handed out. If they would have sat earlier with a fall session, that people have been asking for that $1,000 that was promised for a while now, and now they're being told they can't have it. But and then there's a lot of outreach on the internet there saying, well, why don't you claw back some of those raises that were given to some of the MLAs, and nothing but silence on that.
Yeah, well, they need that money, don't they? I mean, they've got a lot of things that they need to buy. Unlike the average British Columbian, they don't need anything.
There you go. The cynic has spoken. Um, and then this is a Holly Jones Blacklock story, and this is a part problem that's plaguing much of Canada, including British Columbia. Um, Wanted 668,000 over 68,000 medical staff. Canada currently short nearly 69,000 doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers, says a Department of Health report. Um, and Canada clearly has urgent work to do. And again, if you look at that capital gains increase in the inclusion tax, which is likely going to go away, did not help those matters.
Certainly not for doctors, yeah, but I mean, the one there that I'm looking at that really shocks me is the nurses. 41,500, more than that, 41,584 nurses. I mean, that is an enormous amount of nurses, and as anybody that's anybody that's spoken to nurses or even doctors knows, it's impossible to run a medical operation without nurses. You just can't do it. Doctors can't do it by themselves. So that's quite frightening, isn't it? How do you get more than 41,000 nurses? Like where do you find that many?
Yeah, so here's the other problem, and I know from personal experience, my daughter's a nurse, that she has to have two licenses to practice both in Alberta and BC. And the National Post did an article saying that doctors can't practice anywhere in the country due to interprovincial barriers. It just We have a Red Seal program for trades, and yet we don't have something for doctors and nurses. Like she has to pay twice the fees to practice both in Alberta and in BC. Makes no sense at all. And if she's qualified to work in Alberta, why isn't she qualified to work in British Columbia? Why do we putting barriers up for our health practitioners that you think one standard across Canada would make sense?
Definitely. But I just think the provinces, I mean, it's the nature of confederation, I suppose, and the way that Canada was built and the way that it was sort of designed to work. You have these like very, very mighty jurisdictions in the form of provinces, don't you? And I mean, it's a very old argument, but maybe they have a little bit too much power when they can create
Yeah,
problems this severe.
I think
But
it
I mean,
might.
it's not just that. I mean, these barriers aren't the only reason that there's a lack of healthcare workers.
Um,
It's something that's not often mentioned in these stories. I don't know if it is in Blacklock because I haven't read this one. But one of the main reasons for this shortage is that the demand is so high, and
mm,
that's to do with demographics. That's to do with
mm.
the fact that the average age in Canada is like something around 40, isn't it? Like there are just so many old people in this society that it's almost and it's growing too at a very rapid rate if you look at the projections because there haven't been many kids being born and the baby boom is obviously that was a glut of births They just keep getting older and older. So I just don't really understand. I don't understand how it can be achieved really, unless we can train those Optimus robots to become nurses or something like that. I just don't know how you could possibly find the manpower to solve the demographic crisis.
Well, a lot of it has to do with bodies, though, too. Like each province has its own body that looks after their doctors and nurses and that, and then that's part of the problem too. I mean, I'm an accountant, and like, there is a national body, and I think they did solve it with the Red Seal program with trades, and there's no reason they can't do it with our health professionals as well. And some of these bodies just need to let go and have a national body as opposed to all these provincial bodies. And it might get rid of
Yeah.
some duplication, some costs and that. Like I said, like my daughter pays fees both in British Columbia and in Alberta to practice in both places. So those are additional fees that the nurse has to pay to be able to work in both provinces. And during COVID, she couldn't find enough work, so she was actually working in both, in a hospital in Calgary and in a hospital, and she's working in KGH here in Kelowna.
Yeah. I mean, those organizations are extremely controversial, aren't they? And that's, you've mentioned it for accountancy there and also nursing, but I mean, anybody that knows anybody or has spoken to anybody that has to deal with these colleges and these associations knows that it's never a good relationship, is it? They never like them. I've never known a single person that says like, "Oh, thank God for my college, you're always looking after me," when they just take huge amounts of money and it seems to me create quite a lot of trouble. So that's definitely an area that probably does need to be looked at, I would say. But how do you get these people to voluntarily relinquish the power that they have and the status that they have in the provinces? I don't know. That's the
That
real question.
That is the toughest thing, and that's that reaction you're seeing in the United States right now, where you're seeing this duplication and these efforts, and the screaming and the shrieking, because you're taking away, some of these positions, and these duplications of effort and that. So Pierre Poilievre is one of his policy plans is that he would do similar to a Red Seal program for the healthcare professionals. So something to look at. Again, with Pierre Poilievre, Blacklock story again, Holly Dones. Media, according to is highly undemocratic, according to opposition leader Pierre Poilievre. And we experience this ourselves. He says that it's dominated by media reliant on the parliamentary gallery, is reliant on media that is reliant on federal subsidies. His remarks followed a 2019 court ruling in which a federal judge faulted the Gallery and House of Commons administration for blacklisting two news organizations for secretive internal media accreditation guidelines. And we've experienced that as well. And he says
Yeah.
independent media should be allowed on the precinct.
Well,
And
it's kind of crazy that these people who work for, a few news organizations, private companies, except for CBC, which is kind of, I guess a more complicated case. But that's all they are. They're employees at private companies. And then they get together and decide who can report on parliamentary business in Parliament. I mean, that is nuts, isn't it? But it's just classic. It's like just like what we were saying there. It's like these people have acquired for themselves a status that they like. They get to control things and they get to pretend that they're special people.
yeah.
And it's very, very hard to dislodge people from positions like that. They're often reluctant. But I mean, certainly if Poilievre wins a majority in Parliament and he's committed to this as a sort of a big issue, and I think he is actually, then yeah, he could change it. But I think he's very interested in it because of that line there, that last line that you've clipped, which is where he says, "I go and hold a press conference, and it's just liberal media who are there to attend." And he's saying that, he's calling them liberal media because they're all subsidized. I mean, there's certainly,
Well,
I think there's a point to be made there, isn't there?
yeah.
They're all subsidized. I mean, either subsidized through these various programs or subsidized in total, like in completely subsidized in the case of the CBC. I mean, that is a peculiar situation to be in. And certainly, as an opposition leader, he must feel that pretty intensely.
Yeah, and it's not only access they're blocking, like, they get together and decide who gets access, but it's also funding. So they're selectively deciding who gets to live and die. because Bill C-18 has cut off funding to many independent media outlets and took away their audience, like ourselves, and we have an audience of 200,000 that's been blocked now almost 2 years, and yet we don't have access to funding that many of these other outlets are getting. And then then they're blocking access, so access, funding, and then competition, really.
Yeah, and then it's entirely too cozy. The Canadian media scene is way too cozy and incestuous. It's a bit like the political scene, actually. And there's if anybody's ever wondered why is the Canadian media so boring and so, let's just be frank about it, why are they so crap? Why can't they do a very good job at just reporting on stories, holding power to account, being entertaining? Why does nobody watch the news in Canada? Partly, this is why. This is why, because they get together and they have this very chummy relationship with politicians and with each other, and they're very sort of conservative with a small c.
Well, they,
Ironically for Pierre Poilievre here, they don't want to change, and they don't want their little bubble to be popped.
well, there you go. This is the gap we're trying to fill. We're entertaining, if nothing else, right?
Well, that's why Chrystia Freeland watches, obviously, because we're so hilarious. We got the banter, which
There
they
you go.
really lack. If anybody's ever wasted their life watching CTV or CBC, not much banter, is there?
And then we just had a comment on our TikTok and says conservatives have hijacked the media. That's comedy, including this channel.
How? I mean, like, let's hope they're still listening. How? Please explain, and we'll interact, we'll respond, because I'm really interested in how that is the case.
Yeah, I am as well, because there's been people accusing us of getting money from the Russians, and then accusing us of getting money from Trudeau, and we don't get any money from anybody, just so you know. So
It
there you
depends
go.
on the story. If the story we write is unsatisfactory to partisans on the right, then we're slaves of Justin Trudeau. And if it's the other way around, then we're slaves of Pierre Poilievre or bloody Vladimir Putin or whoever else. I mean, that's just a sign of I think that's just a sign of like a lot of discord in Canadian society, isn't it? Where people, they don't want to believe that what they're seeing might be true if it reflects badly on their partisan position. They would rather just accuse the people who are communicating this message to them of being somehow corrupt, because that's easier for their psyches to deal with.
A lot of people like to watch like 30 seconds and then become judge, jury, and executioner as well, right? So it's quick and easy to do. I mean, not as easy to do in Europe right now, where they actually go to your door and take your phone and your laptop and arrest you for posting a meme. So in Canada,
Indeed.
you're still allowed to make your wild accusations. So there you go.
Well, you can actually be arrested and prosecuted. That has happened a few times, but I think the threshold is a lot more
Hmm.
normal, let's say. Whereas in a lot more kind of, you can sometimes understand why. Like, it's often to do with like terrorism, like ISIS and stuff like that, or like actual sort of incitement of violence. Whereas in Europe, it quite literally is. Well, we were talking earlier about the German situation. In Germany, it's illegal to insult people. That's always something I've found like so funny. But that what was it, CBS? You're saying they actually sort of like highlighted just how ridiculous that is. I mean, Germany's an extreme case, obviously, but even in my country of birth, there in England, there's very little that you can say that might sort of skirt the line of turning into offensive before you just get arrested. I mean, it's kind of nuts.
Let's move on to the Liberal leadership race and what's been going on there. One of the front runners, Freeland, I guess not very much in front. Carney obviously way out in front. Freeland says she's now going to cut immigration. She's changed her mind on many things. This is, again, another Holly Dolan's Blacklock story. I would advise people to go to Blacklocks and register. You can get all their great information for subscription. That's how they run their model. It's $314 a year. Well worth the money. She says Canada must sharply reduce immigration quotas due to national housing shortage. And she also was the finance minister and claimed record high immigration was essential to growth. So she's now wanting it both ways, I guess. As prime minister, she will fight to end the housing crisis, and she has a real plan to end this housing crisis. They've had 10 years, though, to end it. The immigration obviously was a big contributor to the supply and demand stuff. They let in 1.9 million landed immigrants, foreign students, and temporary foreign workers in Canada in 2023. And at the time, Freeland said that it was needed for economic reasons. These are economic policies. And obviously it stressed our health care and it stressed our housing. But she's
Yeah, and
flipped.
everything else, infrastructure in general, I would say. And then the other thing, which is a little bit harder to investigate or define, is the sort of cultural changes that have come as a consequence of millions of people who aren't Canadian coming to live in Canada. I mean, obviously that changes the culture of the country, and it makes it a lot harder for the country to figure out what it's about, who it is. I mean, this is happening all over the Western world. This ties into the what we were on about earlier, though, about the shortages of healthcare workers because of the demographics, because the sort of population pyramid, as they call it, is very bad, very, 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 very bad in Canada. It's that everyone's favorite word, existential. This actually is existential, unlike most of the other things that people say. This is something that could basically end Canada because there are too many old people and barely any young people. And people like Chrystia Freeland, who used to write for the Financial Times, who love their macroeconomics, she'll have known this for decades. And certainly her advisors will have known this. And that sort of explains the push for immigrants, because if people in Canada aren't having children and you look at the data and you say, all right, in 50 years Canada basically won't exist or something along those lines, whatever it is, whatever the forecast is, then people like Chrystia Freeland say, okay, well, let's just like open up the floodgates. Let's let everybody in that we can and try and balance out the demographics. That's the context of it. But now for her to come out and say, oh no, it was all wrong and we need to change it. I mean, I doubt very much that she believes that herself, to be honest. And I know she's listening now, so maybe she'll send in an email. But I think it's political posturing, as they say. I think she's the mass immigration that was introduced to try and improve the demographics of Canada was extremely unpopular with Canadians. And when you need to win an election, you need people to vote for you, like Chrystia Freeland does now. You have to at least pretend to be listening to them, and I think that's what she's doing right now.
Yeah, she's campaigning really against her past 10 years. Like she's flipped on most things. Some people have accused her of actually taking Pierre Poilievre's campaign platform.
Yeah, well, it's an indication that the Liberals, and this is true even of Mark Carney and lots of other Liberals, lots of other sort of high-ranking Liberals, it's an indication that they are very, very well aware that their policies were unpopular. Like the majority didn't want them, because now that they need votes, now that they actually need to go to the people, they're abandoning all of their own old positions.
Yeah, because during the time when all these policies were unpopular and they were challenged on it, they just told you that it was a vibe, that the economy is not that bad and that inflation is not that bad. So it's just a vibe. And then maybe I think Friedland famously said one time, just to cut your Disney streaming account and that should fix it, that $10 or $14 a month. Okay. And I think one person just commented here, it's hard to have kids when you can't afford it. And I think that's the main reason a lot of people are foregoing children is it's definitely tough not to have both people working. So, like that's a choice then. If one of them has to stay home, it's definitely an economy thing.
Yeah, you would think that, wouldn't you? But I mean, I've read quite a lot about this, and there are, economists who sort of call themselves demographers, who just specialize in demography, demographics, like why people do and don't have kids and so on. And they don't seem to agree that it's to do with money, even though it would seem to be obvious that it is. I mean, that just seems like common sense, doesn't it? But they associate it a lot more with urbanization, particularly people moving to the cities and into like in space as well, like
Yeah.
how big your living space is.
How
And
hard to have a child and a dog and a cat in 300 square feet.
yeah, yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then speaking in the other liberal leader, Mark Carney, he was on with Rosemary Barton live with CBC, and And he said some things, and this is Pierre Poilievre kind of like sharing it. So we're going to play this clip for you here.
Poilievre yesterday, as you probably did. He didn't mention the provinces once. He never mentioned First Nations. He acted as if it's just his decision to fly in somewhere and decide which pipeline happened. If you listen to Pierre Poilievre yesterday, as you probably did, he didn't mention the provinces once. He never mentioned First Nations. He acted as if it's just his decision to fly in somewhere and decide which pipeline happened.
Bring home production to this country, and that's what we will have. My common sense plan to unleash the production of our resources will allow us to be self-sufficient. We will incentivize Indigenous leaders to support these projects by letting companies pay a share of their federal corporate taxes to local First Nations. Second, I'm announcing, and by the way, that will allow First Nations to spend that on clean drinking water and a better future for their people. I want the First Nations people of Canada to be the richest people in the world. New trade partners. We sell 75% of our exports to the Americans. I've got a new export partner in mind. A new country that we're going to use to become less dependent on the Americans alone. Great country. Nice people. They speak French and English. Cold climate. It's called Canada. Right now, we have tariff barriers between our provinces that are almost as big as the one that President Trump is threatening. That's why we sell twice as much to the Americans as we do to ourselves. This is madness, my friends. Within 30 days of becoming Prime Minister, I will bring together the premiers with the aim to remove the hundreds.
Yeah, I just want to get to that part there because Carney made that accusation that he didn't mention the First Nations or the provinces, and he clearly did in that speech, and that's where Poilievre was putting that out there, and that's been all over. I did post it on my LinkedIn as well, and then Rosie Barton failed to fact check him there, although they both said they watched it, so I don't know how they missed those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Carney's broader point is valid and is a good point, isn't it? It's really hard to get anything done in Canada because you have all these different layers of authority, and they all want to have their say, and they all want their slice. It is like that's a very good point, but it doesn't mean that you have to be deceptive, as Carney seems to have been there.
Yeah, because I mean, he clearly accuses Poilievre of not addressing those two issues, and that he would address that.
I suppose you could say that, he's exaggerating in a sort of political style, and he's saying, obviously, Poilievre thinks he's addressed them, but he hasn't really. It's just talk. That could be what he's trying to, or that might be how he would defend it.
Yeah, and Rosie Barton did not challenge at all. She nodded when he asked her if she watched it, and obviously they weren't listening when they were watching it. Then, how's that?
Yeah, I guess that might be it, or it's just politics, and it's full of people that tell lies about each other.
There you go. Jagmeet Singh says, count on a March call for an election. And this has been out there quite a bit. People saying that Mark Carney wants to call the election. I mean, I've even had Renee Merrifield on Beyond the Ballot this morning, and she thinks that he will actually ask Justin Trudeau to call the election prior to the leadership vote, so he doesn't have to disclose his financial statements and that. I mean, that's what Rosie Barton did ask too. I'd suggest people go watch that full interview. It's a good interview, actually, and go watch that because he kind of like skirted the issue on disclosing, and this would allow him not to disclose. So, according to Renee, so you can watch that whole Renee Merrifield interview too on Kelowna Now.
But Singh, there, he doesn't seem to think that, does he? He seems to think mid-March, which would mean that would mean that Carney would be Prime Minister by that point, so he would have to do it himself. But that is an interesting idea that Trudeau would do it, but that would raise more questions, wouldn't it, about what's going on, why it is that Trudeau's kind of the leader but not the leader, and it's I think that would be another kind of bad luck for the Liberals. But I don't know if the polls are to be believed, and that's something to debate, isn't it? But if they are to be believed, all this malarkey going on right now caused by the Liberals isn't affecting their popularity, or the only way that it's affecting their popularity is that it's increasing their popularity. So I don't know, maybe they feel emboldened by that.
And then, yeah, so he was saying that the party has fewer than half its candidates nominated, and they need to fill that slate by March. So there's your chance if you want to run for the NDP. They need some candidates. They have nominated up to 140 candidates already. There are more to come. And he said that he's ready to fight in this election. There's many pollsters saying that he's going to have to fight for his own seat.
Yeah, that'll be a very interesting one, especially when you think about how because it's Burnaby, isn't it? His riding, and if you think about the provincial election, there's a lot of people who are inclined towards the Conservatives in that neck of the woods. So that will be an interesting one.
Yeah, and he's many Canadians have expressed their concern that he's kept this Liberal government in power, and we could have had a new leader right now to face the threats of Trump, and yet we don't, and we continue this this kind of like vacuum with a leaderless vacuum. While we face some really tough economic threats from the south of the border.
Indeed, yeah, and that sort of continues, doesn't it? I mean, I do feel like we're living through history right now, aren't we? We're living through history being made, and there's so much happening that it's hard to know where you are. But I think as the years go by, we'll be able to like frame this properly. But it does give me the impression that this will reflect badly on the Liberals, I think, on the decision to be, you know, at least not strong, not have a strong leadership posture at this moment in time in Canadian history. I think that is in future going to be looked upon as a pretty sort of dubious decision.
And then that terrible crash, luckily no lives were lost in the Delta Airlines crash there at Toronto Pearson Airport. We have the video here to play of the crash if you haven't seen it already.
1, 2, 3, oh fuck! Oh fuck! Oh no 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 no!
That's good, wrong. And there's a lot of airline people on there speaking about how it seemed to hit the ground very hard, and it apparently snapped one of the landing gear, and then that's what caused it to flip over onto its side, and then snap the wing off, and then roll over onto its roof.
A miracle that they all survived, though. I mean, I know there's two of them now, I believe, are still in hospital. They released one because there were 3 that were taken. It's just kind of, I mean, I guess it's complete speculation, but I'd imagine that's something to do with their seatbelts, not either not being on properly or not working or something like that. Because if you're upside down, I mean, that's why you wear the seatbelts, really, isn't it? A lot of people don't realize that when they say that they don't want to wear their seatbelt. It's actually to keep you, in the seat in case the plane goes upside down, in case it like drops out of the air or something.
And it's amazing, and maybe that helped that wing detached, because that's where the fuel is stored in the wings, because there was flames.
Yeah.
Right. So.
But I mean, people are quite rightly kind of coming out saying like, "What the hell is going on with aviation in the last couple of months?" Like, it is crazy. There's been a lot of crashes.
This one is not anything to do with air traffic controllers. This seemed to be like, again, a lot of pilots, and I've come out and said that it seemed to hit the deck really hard, as opposed to, I mean, you can go read all the stuff out there. I'm not a pilot, and it does seem like it was more of a bang to the ground as opposed to how they like kind of touch down, right? So I don't know.
But there has been a lot, regardless of the cause. There's been a lot of crashes, and particularly in the West, where we just don't usually ever get them. It's like extraordinarily rare to happen in a Western country. Yeah. But there have been a few, and it is the most concerning.
One of the most tragic ones was recently with that Black Hawk helicopter crashing into that CRJ, which is what this was, a CRJ as well. Um, and I did watch a clip from the dad of one of the pilots in that plane that flew a Black Hawk helicopter in his past, and his son was on the CRJ. And he said that the crews in the Black Hawks, they were on a night vision exercise, and they were wearing their goggles. He said there needed to be a fourth person in there that wasn't wearing night vision, because at night vision narrows your view.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, dreadful. I'm sure it'll be kind of poured over, won't it, with extreme detail and attention. So we'll learn exactly what happened pretty soon,
yeah,
I imagine.
but it's just it's definitely really fortunate that these people all got to like basically walk away with their lives. So great news in that respect for this this flight for sure. Inflation up slightly as GST and brings down prices on booze and toys though. But inflation at 1.9 in January compared to the previous year. But BC actually at higher than the national rate, and we've been seeing this for quite a while now. BC seems to be higher than the national rate at 2.2, but that's down from 2.6, right? So
Yeah. David, I mean, it has been going on a long time, to the extent that before the election, when you spoke to David Eby, he mentioned it, I believe, didn't he? And he said that it was to do with housing, inflated prices for housing in BC. But yeah, I mean, the main what sort of caused this inflation, slight increase was natural gas, and also gasoline. But that natural gas prices have been the sort of the world market is seeing a bit of price increase, isn't it, right now? So I guess
and
you could blame global forces.
you are seeing a lot of people posting their natural gas bills online and then showing that like more is related to the carbon tax and delivery charges than it is in the natural gas prices. So a lot of people are really getting quite upset at that looking at, because obviously in the cold months is where you're going to see like huge, like the bigger gas bills, and then they're showing that a lot of that gas cost, or sorry, their bill is related to the carbon tax and or delivery charges, and then also the GST, and not actually in the natural gas itself.
Yeah, well, it's taxed like mad, isn't it? It's certainly seen as a source of revenue by many different levels of government. But I mean, it's undeniable that the natural gas price has increased as well. Like the actual base price of the product is up. And I don't actually know every single reason for that, but it's true. I mean, one sort of ray of sunshine to this impending betrayal of Ukraine that seems to be happening is that if Russia's like welcomed back into the world of trading nations, it's obviously the largest provider of natural gas in the world. It has the largest reserves. If that's back in business, if Russia comes back, then the price of natural gas should come down considerably. So that might be one sort of good thing.
I guess many Canadians would ask then, what about the carbon tax on there? Because that's that's part of it. So, and according
They would
to
also ask, what about our gas? Is that
yeah,
going to sell for less? And the answer is yes, it will.
there you go. And then we talked about this earlier, but Pascale St-Onge, another Liberal MP that says she's not going to run. She's the Minister for Heritage. You've interviewed her on Bill C-18, and then she says she's not going to run.
But she wants to reform the CBC before she goes. Apparently, that's what CBC's been told, presumably by her press office. They've said that she wants to make the French, division of CBC like separate in law and protected from the potential changes that Poilievre would bring in if he was to win the election. But she's not had a very good time of it, really, has she? I mean, she came in. She was kind of like Trudeau's like headhunted quite a few people, including Chrystia Freeland, but he kind of headhunted her because she was a massive critic of the government. You know, she was the head of a union in Quebec, like a media union, and she was a real like defiant critic. And then he kind of brought her in to run the media for the federal government, basically, or to run sort of things related to the media. And then the biggest task that she's been given, she was given a couple other ones that just ended up being like dead ends that didn't go anywhere. But she was given the C-18, you know, the Online News Act to oversee, and that's not really been a success. I don't think there's anybody, I don't think any neutral observer on this planet would say that, that's gone well. So she hasn't, I don't think she's had a good time of it in politics. She's certainly not been successful in any way. So I think she'll probably leave with a certain amount of bitterness.
Well, I mean, we would say that she keeps saying that she's there to support local independent journalism, and we would argue with that. In fact, Bill C-18 has been crushing for, especially new media, crushing for local independent media, like outlets like ourselves that are denied the funding, yet also had their audiences taken away with Bill C-18. And there is some talk of the digital services tax being attacked as well. So that could end Bill C-18 as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, Zuckerberg, best mates with Donald Trump now, apparently. I mean, I'm sure that in his long list of things that he wants from Trump, I'm sure one of them is sort out this stupid situation in Canada where, you
Well,
know, news articles are banned from Facebook.
Google is due to pay that $100 million here in June, and right now it looks like they might not be paying it. So all the media outlets waiting for that may not get it.
Yep.
And then you put this in, I'll let you talk to it. Trump musings on very large faucet in Canada, part of large looming water crisis.
It's just, you know, credit where it's due, as we always give credit when it's due. And this is quite a good article, I think, by the CBC. I mean, it asks very big questions and it's not long enough or comprehensive enough to answer them, but it's still, it's a good like snap. It's a good like few hundred words on this problem that exists of Canada. Well, I say a problem, in a way it's a problem, I guess, of Canada having a lot of water and America needing a lot of water, and kind of what that means for the future. And they speak to some, I think he's called a water scientist. I thought maybe hydrologist is what he would be actually called, but they refer to him as a water scientist in Saskatchewan. He says that he sees like very dark clouds on the horizon because he senses that, I guess, the system that is in place right now, that which is very orderly and very courteous and sensible when it comes to water between the US and Canada, he sees that as breaking down, and you know, anything could happen then. And obviously Trump, at least in the way he speaks, is an imperialist. That I mean, there's no other way to describe him based on his own language. He believes in acquisition of territory for the United States, including Canada, which he's, you know, has said numerous times he wants to possess. So in that context, that it kind of, it's a little bit spooky, isn't it? It's a little bit scary. The Americans might come and try and seize the water and then send it down into the Valley of California, or, you know, parts of the southwest of America, which are just dry to the bone and have been basically in drought for a very long time now, and they're desperate for water. So it's just one of those things to watch, really, I suppose, over the next few decades.
Yeah, no, I've some of the people on out there on social media saying that we should stop the flow of the Columbia River into the U.S. And I'm just like, where would you put the water? Like, where are you putting it? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a pretty big river. And then, excuse me, the Okanagan Lake system is a river system as well that's controlled by a series of dams. And then we do have a water treaty where, you know, to keep fish alive, we release enough water to keep the fishery, the fish is alive. So that is a chain of lakes. And then we've got a good article on Kelowna Now if you want to look at the Okanagan River system, which is basically a series of lakes that flow into the United States through the Suez Lake there. And that half of Vesuvius Lake is in the United States. So half of Vesuvius Lake is in Canada and half of it's in the United States. So I'm not sure how you stop that either, because the lake is actually in the middle of two countries. No different than many of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, it's split right along there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of rivers. I think part of the Mississippi, part of where it gets some of its water is actually just over the border as well, isn't it? Just a small amount. But there's a certain, you know, this is the thing with Canada and the US, like they're so linked together.
Yeah.
This is why so many people are just exasperated when they see Trump and his cronies come out and say the things that they're saying about Canada. It's kind of like
Yeah.
you
Well,
would expect them to have an extremely comprehensive, detailed plan, but they
I,
obviously don't. It's just kind of like, yeah, let's just 20% tariff on Canada. Let's see what happens, kind of thing. It's like it would be very, very difficult to separate the two countries, and water is just one of like hundreds of areas where they're so strongly linked together.
Trump may be a tough guy, but I don't think he's tougher than Mother Nature. So Mother Nature has her own. Again, it's tough to contain that water. So, Melanie Jolie, Canadians are interested in being involved in Ukraine security after the war.
Yeah, involved in Canadians sort of, as she said, Canadians actually being like, yeah, so involved. I mean, quite vague language, but I mean, it sort of suggests Canadian soldiers. Do we have any of them? If we can find any of them, if
I
you can
think
do the Where's Waldo and find the Canadian soldier, then we
I think
send them to Ukraine.
it's no. I think she's parroting what the UK Prime Minister said, where they want to put British troops there, like in a peacekeeping role to keep the security once they get peace, to ensure the security stays. So they did conclude those talks today in Riyadh with Saudi Arabia between the Russians and the Americans, and they did say that the next step will involve the Europeans and Zelensky, because there's a lot of frustration from the Europeans and Zelensky that it was the United States and the Russians that were speaking first to each other.
Yeah, justifiably so, I would say, considering the Europeans have given far more money to Ukraine than the Americans. But obviously, the Americans have given more in terms of weapons, so they think that it's all theirs. Well, I mean, it's not just that. They also just realize that they're
But
America and they're the kings of the world. So
and I
they're
would
doing what they want.
I would push back. There has been no communication with the U.S. government or the Europeans for a long time with the Russians, and the first step in ending any conflict is actually a conversation.
Well, they did try. Macron had a number of phone calls with Putin, didn't he? Quite sort of
That was a long time
high
ago.
profile.
It's been a
And then
while.
he just said eventually, he just keeps lying. He just keeps saying he's going to do something and he doesn't do it. So there's just no point in speaking to him anymore.
Well,
And
they're
I can
all
kind of understand that, but that's to do with hard power as well, isn't it? When you're dealing with a psychopathic thug like Vladimir Putin, if you don't have the actual strength to back up your threats or whatever, or your demands, let's say, put it nicely, then a psychopathic thug is not going to really act based on what you do, not going to really care. And Europe doesn't have much of a military at all, frankly, similar to Canada. So it's all bark and no bite. So obviously the Russians just promptly, or let's say Vladimir Putin, listened to Macron and so on, and Schultz and all the rest of those losers, and then promptly just ignored everything that they said and continued with the war. Whereas America actually does have a military, so, and has actual hard power. So if they threaten you and tell you to do something, you will listen, won't you? Even if you're, a dishonest scoundrel barbarian like Vladimir Putin.
Let's move on to markets. Gold up this morning, up quite a bit actually, and challenging for that $3,000 mark US. And in Canadian dollars, care to take a guess again today?
I'm going to say 4,300.
No, 41.58, up $45 today though.
That's not bad. I feel like you dismissed that fairly good guess there.
You were close. There you go. In in Canadian dollars, quite a bit, like 29.31 in American, and you can just see the difference, eh? And then 41.59 in Canadian dollars. Bitcoin, again, doing its thing in that range there, bouncing around, kind of building a really strong base, just under the $100,000 mark. Currently just under 95,000. But again, it looks like it's building, and it looks like, to me, it technically looks like a head and shoulders pattern. If any traders out there want to make any comments on that, but that's what it looks like to me. Canadian dollar does not believe that tariffs are going to be that big of a deal. If you look at it, Canadian dollar actually recovering in the last little while. So an election would definitely help. Canadian dollar above that 70-cent mark, which is great news. You can see that spike down there in the bottom right corner there. That was when the big 25% tariffs were looming and causing nothing but problems. And then we're just talking about markets in general. Uranium becoming really a hot commodity too. In Canada, until 2008, Canada held the world's uranium crown. It's now trying to reclaim that. It's now the world's second largest producer of uranium. Canadian mining companies are racing to set up new mines to capture the nuclear zeitgeist. Nuclear power is a big thing again, and a lot of even the AI firms, the tech firms, are trying to get access to nuclear power, including restarting 3 Mile Island. We talked about that a while ago in our show. We got
It's
lots.
Microsoft, isn't it? I think who acquired that.
Yeah, we got lots to talk about in the AI world, though. Like crazy busy weekend in that regard. Elon Musk's xAI launched next gen Grok 3, and he said it's the best thing out there right now. So I watched that presentation. Lots of cool things going on in there. He did it kind of like Sam Altman. 4 people sitting around a table talking really nerdy. So it was like 4 nerds sitting around a table talking about how this thing is the best thing since sliced bread. And if you look at that chart there above them, it's Chatbot Arena. That it shows at the top left there that Grok 3 is in the lead right now, according to them, right? So, and there you go. And then
It's pretty convenient, that, isn't it?
yeah. And then there was that big AI summit in Paris, the Paris Summit. And like a lot of people are saying that it failed because the US and the UK refused to sign a declaration on inclusive and sustainable artificial intelligence, like on really on regulation. And both the US and the UK says we're not going to sign that. And that really disappointed a lot of people at the Paris summit. And then J.D. Vance said that the U.S. is not going to be held back from developing artificial intelligence by global regulation or excessive focus on safety, because they realize that they're in an AI race with the Chinese and the Russians. Whereas you and I have talked about this many times, is that the Europeans and Canadians seem to be in a rush to regulate instead of innovate. And J.D. Vance's speech at the summit was the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the US is so obviously. I mean, China, China signs things like this all the time. It's worth less than toilet paper.
Yeah,
to
for
the
China,
Chinese.
they'll sign it. They don't care. They'll sign it, but they
Yeah,
won't do
they'll
it,
sign
right?
anything. They just do not care. But the leaders in AI are China, who like we've laughed
Yeah.
about just now, won't pay any heed to this anyway. So they're not restricted by this. Then the US and the sort of countries after that who are pretty high include the UK. So basically, the countries that are producing AI don't want to be regulated by countries that aren't producing it. I mean, that's understandable, isn't it? I can't believe they're surprised.
Yeah. So I mean, they'd hoped, and that's the thing. And when you're not innovating, you're trying to slow everybody else down. But you know, the countries that did sign included France, China, India, Japan, Australia, and Canada. And again, like you said, China will sign anything, and they just won't adhere to it. They'll probably sign it and hope that you follow it. And at least the Americans and the UK said, we're not signing it, instead of just being dishonest and signing it and then not doing it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the France is a bit of a funny one because they do have, well, the French have some AI companies. They actually have an AI sector of some sort of significance, and then they also, generally speaking, obey treaties that they sign, though not always. So I mean, that is a peculiar one from them, I guess. I can't really understand that from the French perspective, and India as well. It's not like India to do this kind of thing, but then India would break a treaty like this at the drop of a hat if they suddenly had a thriving AI scene, you know, like they always look after themselves, the Indians. So those ones for me look quite interesting.
Yeah, somebody asked in our comments there if anybody remembers FTX, the scandal in Sam Bankman-Fried. Of course, we do remember the whole big scandal, and Sam Bankman-Fried, we understand, is still in prison. But he, you know, surprisingly, I thought maybe he might get a pardon, but his name seems to have been missed in that. I don't know what kind of prison he's in. And interesting world. The New York Times approves AI use, though. So there you go. So some editorial staff starting to use it. They're using an AI tool called Echo, designed to summarize articles, briefings, and company updates for employees. They'll receive AI training, new guidelines out suggesting edits, generating summaries, and creating SEO headlines. There you go. Like, that's who's responsible for all those headlines that are clickbaity.
That's why they're so dreadful.
They say AI cannot draft or significantly rewrite articles, bypass paywalls, or process copyrighted materials. That's what they're saying. There you go.
I think that there's just to translate that for people who don't know, I would say that thing about bypassing paywalls and copyright materials, that's because the New York Times is one of many organizations that's expressed fury over the likes of ChatGPT, which they say just uses its copyrighted material. So that's their way of saying, you know, we're still angry about that. And then the other thing there, where they say AI cannot draft or significantly rewrite articles, that's them saying to their reporters, please don't go on strike or get angry. We're not going to fire you and replace you with AI writers. But, you know, I would say that they're not committed really to either of those points. And if the tide turns sufficiently, they'll jettison both of those points, I would suggest.
The word significantly stands out there, in that AI cannot draft or significantly rewrite articles. So
yeah, they're definitely going to use it, and it's going to be, you know, I mean, this is just one of so many areas. It's almost like you can ask the question, like, why are we even focusing on this one? Because there are so many, but I think it is quite important how you get your news. But I mean, AI it's definitely going to penetrate news, and there are going to be lots of people that are upset about it. But I think one of the things that I think about almost the most when it comes to AI is like law, like who are people in the law who are paid astonishing amounts of money, as anybody that's ever had to deal with a lawyer will know. They get an astonishing amount of money, and sometimes it's just so that they can go and like read books on the Constitution, or you know, like read laws. That's sometimes like basically what they're doing. And then they come back to you and say, okay, this is the law. I mean, AI can do that in 10 seconds, and it's basically free. So I feel like that's going to be one that all these professionals, you know, journalists, doctors, lawyers, it's almost like they're the first targets of AI, which is not usually how it works with technology. Usually technology gets the kind of the people who are at the low skilled end of the spectrum, but it's going to get high skilled first.
Yeah, accountants, lawyers, that stuff, and that was my job in accounting. I did watch that Grok presentation, and one of the demonstrations was pretty interesting. So the question that was asked of Grok 3 was, plan a mission to Mars and return, and then illustrate that. And of course, Elon would know how to get to Mars and back. And it did the the orbits of the illustration, the orbits of the Earth and Mars, and then it did the trajectory, and it did all the computations for launching a rocket to meet that, because Mars and Earth are close together every 26 months. And so you don't want to go when they're far apart, obviously, but you do want to go when they're super close to each other. Super close, meaning a lot closer than they typically would be. So pretty impressive what it did. And then they did another demonstration where it asked it to create a game and actually make it a workable game. And they did a blend of Tetris, and I can't remember this other game name. And, you know, I'm not a gamer, so, but it created a game like in a matter of minutes, and that was playable. So pretty impressive.
Yeah, and people have said that they've used it to build an app. Like they've had a concept for an app, and that's actually succeeded in writing the code like sufficiently good, sufficiently accurate code to be able to actually just build the app right there and then and like use it.
Yeah. And then, so some people might say the AI might be better at news than some people at news. I've had this thought. I've had this thought that we should actually incorporate it into our show, and maybe we'll give it a try. Is actually use ChatGPT as to be our fact checker. We can actually have it, because I've interviewed ChatGPT live, and it was actually a pretty good interview. You can go back and watch that. But actually having it run in the background here and fact check us every now and then.
It's not a bad idea. Yeah. Although I don't know if you notice, but I mean, I do an awful lot of fact checking of ChatGPT, which is the one that I use most often. I mean, and it's kind of it's a bit it worries me a little bit where it will say something that I immediately recognize as false, and then I'll say, you know, because it likes to use numbers, doesn't it? Like lists. So I'll say number 3 there. That's just wrong. And that's all I'll say, something like really brief. And then it gets back and it says, yep, you're totally right there. I'm wrong. It's kind of like, so why did you do that? So I mean, it's still very you should treat it with a lot of caution and skepticism, I would say.
I would say ChatGPT is a lot better than Gemini, where it actually intentionally makes up stuff.
Yeah, it's not quite as it's nothing as bad as that, no. But they I don't know, it does come back with sometimes things that are like the opposite of the truth. I don't know if it's just the way that it's processed the sources that it searches for or something like that, but sometimes it really does make pretty embarrassing mistakes that, you know, like a human just wouldn't make that kind of error. But I mean, obviously it's early days, isn't it? And it's only going to get better, like a lot better.
So Elon claiming that Grok 3 was the best AI out there, and ChatGPT 5 set to release within weeks or months. So Sam Altman putting out their OpenAI roadmap update for ChatGPT 4.5 and 5. They want to do a better job. What do you got going on there, Rommel? And a much better job simplifying product offerings. There you go. So Sam Altman says that get ready, buckle up.
It's a really interesting competition now, isn't it? Like for quite a while, it seemed just to be him, just to be OpenAI, didn't it? Not really many real contenders. And then now there's quite a lot of pretty serious contenders.
I think Sam Altman and Elon Musk should check with the Europeans and the rest of them and see if there's some regulations they need to be following. Yeah. In our EV segment, this is pretty cool. This is Chinese technology. BYD's new Denza Z9. We're going to play a little video for you here. That's good, Rommel. For all you people that don't know how to parallel park, there you go, in those tight spaces.
I would say that's, in my experience, most people probably, so they'll be happy about that.
It's I don't know what that does for the rubber on the tires, because obviously that's a back tire spinning one way and the against each other, and that's how it kind of like skids its way into that parking space there. Interesting for sure. Um, and that vehicle is $47,000 US. And some of the Chinese EVs are just super posh, and none of them are allowed in Canada or the US right now. But like they're ending up in lots of parts of the world, including Australia. So that whole market, the Chinese EVs are, like most people in China are buying an electric vehicle. And in some parts of Europe, like including Norway now, it's 100% of all new vehicle sales. It's still quite low here in Canada and in the United States, but some of the technology in these vehicles is just mind-blowing. We got our meme. We're going to close off with our meme. And South Korea joins DeepSeek ban. That's the Chinese AI. And it's actually an animated meme, but that's it. I'm blocking you.
Yeah, it's I mean, cars. So EVs we were just discussing there. AI. It's kind of, and chips. Like that. There are two, at least two economic blocks emerging now, aren't there? And it seems like the American-led bloc is absolutely convinced that they can exclude China from the party, and that's what this is. Obviously, South Korea is essentially a kind of vassal of the United States, and that's them out. Just like we don't buy Chinese EVs, we're gonna like TikTok and all sorts of things. Like we follow their lead on most things, don't we? And that's the American bloc being created before our eyes.
Two of the biggest purchases people make in their lives are typically their home and their automobile. And now automobile production is now the greatest auto producer in the world is China. Like they make over half the automobiles. Like they run the manufacturing in the world market now, right? So they are the biggest. And that technology that they're creating is that was done in a few short years. Like if you look at the rise of the Japanese automaker, that took a little while, and they kind of started off like, and remember, I don't know if you remember, but the first Hondas that came out and Hyundais were just absolute garbage, right? They were rusting on the basically on the dealership floor, right? Like the Hyundai Pony and that, they were just so bad. And now look at what they make is incredible, but it took a little bit longer. But the Chinese have gone from like almost no game in the automobile market to like on their game. And again, it was really by inviting all the legacy automakers to China. And that includes Ford and GM and Porsche and Audi and Volkswagen. We're all there making cars in China. And now they're closing those factories down, and the Chinese automobile companies are buying those closed out factories and taking them over and starting to build EVs.
Yeah, it's been a fairly sort of predatory economic policy that has actually worked, hasn't it, for the Chinese?
And I would say the same thing. Apple went there with Foxconn to build their iPhones, and then all of a sudden there's this company that's one of the world leading companies, Huawei, right? They seem to build really good phones. They invite you there. And again, I've used this analogy as they're like the Ferengi. They copy everything and they just, they work at doing it cheaper, better, and faster.
Yeah, it's economic nationalism in play, isn't it? In practice. But if the Americans do succeed in sort of completely or mostly separating themselves from the Chinese economy, at least on high value add stuff like cars and phones, if they do that, then China, when you actually look at consumption around the world, so much of it comes from the US, just the US. It's such a huge chunk. It's kind of like, that's why they say, like, if you really want to make it in any business with any sort of product, it has to be sold in America, because that's where all the consumers are, really, a huge chunk of consumers. But then if you add in Canada, Europe, Australia, and all the rest of America's followers, then you kind of run out of consumers. So in that scenario, the Chinese would just be selling to themselves and to various like middle income countries and poor countries. That's not gonna work for them the way that it worked for the Japanese, for example. The Japanese had the whole world to sell to, that's how they made themselves into such a rich country. But if the Chinese had denied that opportunity, then I don't really know how they can do it. You know, I don't know how it could possibly work if you don't have the market to sell it to.
Yeah, so that's that's our show for today. We do thank you for watching. We ask you to visit KelownaNow.com all the time. We're on every morning. We're late this morning. We're late on Tuesdays because we have the Beyond the Ballot show with Renee Merrifield, former MLA, that comes on every Tuesday at 8:30. So, but typically we're on just around 9 o'clock. So we look forward to chatting with you tomorrow. Until then, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.